We are reading a text by John Berger. It's called Why Look at Animals. It's an essay which he wrote in 1977, and it's part of a collection of essays in a book which is also called Why Look at Animals. This book is part of the Jameel Library collection, and we thought and we felt this could be a fantastic text to read and reflect upon.
Yeah, and we are not reading the whole essay, but some selected parts from the essay we're going to read.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's start.
So, why look at animals? The 19th century in Western Europe and North America saw the beginning of a process today being completed by 20th century corporate capitalism, by which every tradition which has previously mediated between man and nature was broken. Before this rupture, animals constituted the first circle of what surrounded man. Perhaps that already suggests too great a distance. They were with man at the center of his world. Such centrality was, of course, economic and productive. Whatever the changes in productive means and social organization, men depended upon animals for food, work, transport, clothing. Yet, to suppose that animals first entered the human imagination as meat or leather or horn is to project a 19th century attitude backwards across the millennia. Animals first entered the imagination as messengers and promises. For example, the domestication of cattle did not begin as a simple prospect of milk and meat. Cattle had magical functions, sometimes oracular, sometimes sacrificial. And the choice of a given species as magical, tameable, and elementary was originally determined by the habits, proximity, and invitation of the animal in question. No animal confirms man, either positively or negatively. The animal can be killed and eaten so that its energy is added to that which the hunter already possesses. The animal can be tamed so that it supplies and works for the peasant. But always its lack of common language, its silence guarantees its distance, its distinctness, its exclusion from and of man. Just because of this distinctness, however, an animal's life, never to be confused with a man's, can be seen to run parallel to his. Only in death do the two parallel lines converge, and after death perhaps cross over to become parallel again. Hence the widespread belief in the transmigration of souls. With their parallel lives, animals offer man a companionship which is different from any offered by human exchange. Different because it is a companionship offered to the loneliness of man as a species. Wow.
That's interesting.
That's a very profound line, you know. So, what were the secrets of the animal's likeness with and unlikeness from man? The secrets whose existence man recognized as soon as he intercepted an animal's look. Today, the vestiges of this dualism remain among those who live intimately with and depend upon animals. A peasant becomes fond of his pig and is glad to salt away its pork. What is significant and is so difficult for the urban stranger to understand is that the two statements in that sentence are connected by an and not by a but.
Okay, that sounds interesting. Can you read again that?
So he says a peasant becomes fond of his pig and is glad to salt away its pork. What is significant and is so difficult for the urban stranger to understand is that the two statements in that sentence are connected by an and not by a but.
Wow.
It's the same politics that we were talking about, that you have your own animals at home in the politics of the structure that we are part of, and you eat them.
Yeah, exactly.
So, you know, it's, The parallelism of their similar or dissimilar lives allowed animals to provoke some of the first questions and offer answers. The first subject matter for painting was animal.
Sorry, I just thought when just the previous thing. It also depends, like, you know, when you have one animal or a larger number of animals.
Yeah.
Because when you have one animal, there is an emotional connection with the animal.
No, you start with giving a name.
Exactly. The
first instinct. And we impose our idea of emotions onto them. And we universalize
then it will
them.
become a difficult to eat that animal.
Absolutely,
So here otherwise what happens when it's a more number, then that's your food.
Yeah.
And it's also idea like it's not a pet.
No.
It's a food.
Yeah.
So there is that understanding of
pet and food.
Pet and food. There's a big difference. Okay. Sorry, go ahead.
The first subject matter for painting was animal. Probably the first paint was animal blood. Prior to that, it is not unreasonable to suppose that the first metaphor was animal. Rousseau, in his essay on the origins of languages, maintained that language itself began with metaphor. He quotes, "As emotions were the first motives which induced man to speak, his first utterances were metaphors. Figurative language was the first to be born. Proper meanings were the last to be found. All theories of ultimate origin are only ways of better defining what followed. Those who disagree with Rousseau are contesting a view of man, not a historical fact. What we are trying to define, because the experience is almost lost, is the universal use of animal signs for charting the experience of the world." Okay, I jump a couple of more sections. Until the 19th century, however, anthropomorphism was integral to the relation between man and animal and was an expression of their proximity. Anthropomorphism was the residue of the continuous use of animal metaphor. In the last 2 centuries, animals have gradually disappeared. Today, we live without them. And in this new solitude, anthropomorphism makes us doubly uneasy. The decisive theoretical break came with Descartes. Descartes internalized within man the dualism implicit in the human relation to animals. In dividing absolutely body from soul, he bequeathed the body to the laws of physics and mechanics. And since animals were soulless, the animal was reduced to the model of a machine. During the 20th century, the internal combustion engine displaced draught animals in streets and factories. Cities, growing at an ever-increasing rate, transformed the surrounding countryside into suburbs, where field animals, wild or domesticated, became rare. The commercial exploitation of certain species, like bison, tigers, reindeer, has rendered them almost extinct. Such wildlife as remains is increasingly confined to national parks and game reserves. Eventually, Descartes' model was surpassed. In the first stages of the Industrial Revolution, animals were used as machines. So also were children. Later, in the so-called post-industrial societies, they are treated as raw material. Animals required for food are processed like manufactured commodities. This reduction of the animal, which has a theoretical as well as an economic history, is part of the same process as that by which men have been reduced to isolated productive and consuming units. It's a very interesting line of history he is pulling in this. Is there not one way in which animals, instead of disappearing, continue to multiply? Never have there been so many household pets as are to be found today in the cities of the richest countries. In the United States, it is estimated that there are at least 40 million dogs, 40 million cats, 15 million cage birds, and 10 million other pets. The practice of keeping animals, regardless of their usefulness, the keeping exactly of pets, he quotes it, pets, is a modern innovation. And on the social scale on which it exists today is unique. It is part of the universal but personal withdrawal into the private small family unit, decorated or furnished with mementos from the outside world, which is such a distinguishing feature of consumer societies. This small family living unit lacks space, earth, other animals, seasons, natural temperatures, and so on. The pet is either sterilized or sexually isolated, extremely limited in its exercise, deprived of almost all the other animal contact, and fed with artificial foods. The cultural marginalization of animals is, of course, a more complex process than their physical marginalization. The animals of the mind cannot be so easily dispersed. Sayings, dreams, games, stories, superstition, the language itself recall them. The animals of the mind, instead of being dispersed, have been co-opted into other categories, so that the category animal has lost its central importance. Mostly, they have been co-opted into the family and into the spectacle. The books and drawings of Beatrix Potter are an early example. All the animal productions of the Disney industry are a more recent and extreme one. In such works of pettiness of current social practices is universalized by being projected onto the animal kingdom. Okay, the following is a dialogue between Donald Duck and his nephew, which is very eloquent enough. Okay. So Donald says, "Man, what a day! What a perfect day for fishing, boating, dating, or picnicking. Only I can't do any of these things." His nephew wonders, "Why not, Uncle Donald? What's holding you back?" Well, Donald says, "The bread of life, boys. As usual, I'm broke and it's eons till payday." Well, nephew says, "You could take a walk, Uncle Donald. Go bird watching." Donald groans, "I may have to. But first, I'll wait for the mailman. He may bring something good news-wise." Nephew says, "Like a check from an unknown relative in Moneyville."
Nice.
Their physical features apart, these animals have been absorbed into the so-called silent majority. However, in the accompanying ideology, animals are always the observed. The fact that they can observe us has lost all significance. I think that's what we were talking the other day. You know, the fact that they're constantly, like for example, the mongoose. We are obsessed in protecting our chickens.
Right.
And how the mongoose knows our pattern of our daily life. We think mongoose comes random time, but no. They
no, because they are also looking at us and
constantly.
they're observing us.
Yeah, so they know what time we eat food, and what time we take a nap or whatever. And the way they plan life. For their food, basically. So, the fact that they can observe us has lost all significance. They are the objects of our ever-extending knowledge. What we know about them is an index of our power, and thus an index of what separates us from them. The more we know, the further away they are.
It's the same. I feel it's what with this baby goat. You know, because so recently we had a delivery and the mother refused to take care of the baby goat, so we had to feed her, like hold her and feed with the mother. And so now whenever this baby goat is hungry, she just call us. She look at us and call, like towards the house and call. You know, it's so fast. It's only 4 days, and it's so fast that. And also our shock that how can you be a mother and not mother the child? That's a very conflicting emotion, because by default it's our way of understanding how what we deal with motherhood. Right? So we are shocked. Why is she's a mother and she's not taking care of the child? So what kind of a mother was the first question? But then the reality. But that question also coming from our baggage
of the how human societies understand particular concepts. You know. Okay, this is something completely different direction. So he talks about public zoos came into existence at the beginning of the period, which was to see the disappearance of animals from daily life. The zoo to which people go to meet animals, to observe them, to see them, is in fact a monument to the impossibility of such encounters. Modern zoos are an epitaph to a relationship which was as old as man. They are not seen as such because the wrong questions have been addressed to zoos. When they were founded, the London Zoo in 1828, the Jardin des Plantes in 1793, the Berlin Zoo in 1844, they brought considerable prestige to the national capitals. Likewise, in the 19th century, public zoos were an endorsement of modern colonial power. The capturing of the animals was a symbolic representation of the conquest of all distant and exotic lands. Yet, like every other 19th century public institution, the zoo, however, supportive of the ideology of imperialism, had to claim an independent and civic function. The claim was that it was another kind of museum, whose purpose was to further knowledge and public enlightenment. And so, the first questions asked of zoos belong to natural history. It was then thought possible to study the natural life of animals, even in such unnatural conditions. Children in the industrialized world are surrounded by animal imagery, toys, cartoons, pictures, decorations of every sort. No other source of imagery can begin to compete with that of animals. The apparently spontaneous interest that children have in animals might lead one to suppose that this has always been the case. Certainly, some of the earliest toys were animal. Equally, children's games all over the world include real or pretended animals. Yet, it was not until the 19th century that reproductions of animals became a regular part of the decor of middle-class childhoods. And then, in this century, with the advent of vast display and selling systems like Disney's for all childhoods. So, zoos, realistic animal toys, and the widespread commercial diffusion of animal imagery all began as animals started to be withdrawn from daily life. One could suppose that such innovations were compensatory. Yet, in reality, the innovations themselves belong to the same remorseless movement as was dispersing the animals. The marginalization of animals is today being followed by the marginalization and disposal of the only class who throughout history has remained familiar with animals and maintained the wisdom which accompanies that familiarity, the middle and the small peasant. The basis of this wisdom is an acceptance of the dualism at the very origin of the relation between man and animal. Today, the look between animal and man, which may have played a crucial role in the development of human society, and with which, in any case, all men had always lived until less than a century ago, has been extinguished. Looking at each animal, the unaccompanied zoo visitor is alone. As for the crowds, they belong to a species which has at last been isolated.
It's quite.
It's a profound text, and it's on the face. It's disturbing.
It also leaves us with so many questions.
That's the thing.
It just creates certain conflict in the head,
and also unsettling you. Unsettling with your basic emotions. It's a very your relation, a human relation with the landscape.
Right.
Coming back to that point.